May 31st, 2025. I would like to speak briefly and simply about a serious national condition, Senator Margaret Chase Smith of Maine told her colleagues on June 1st, 1950. It is a national feeling of fear and frustration that could result in national suicide and the end of everything that we Americans hold dear. I speak as a Republican. I speak as a woman. I speak as a United States Senator. I speak as an American. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism in making character assassinations are all too frequently those who, by our own words and acts, ignore some of the basic principles of Americanism, she pointed out. Americans have the right to criticize, to hold unpopular beliefs, to protest, and to think for themselves. But attacks that cost people their reputations and jobs were stifling these basic American principles, and the ones making those attacks were in her own party. Wisconsin Senator Joe McCarthy, who was sitting 2 rows behind her, led a faction that had cowed almost all of the Republican Party into silence by accusing their opponents of communism. Smith recognized the damage McCarthy and his ilk were doing to the nation. She had seen the effects of his behavior up close in Maine, where the faction of the Republican Party that supported McCarthy had supported the state's Ku Klux Klan. Freedom of speech is not what it used to be in America, Senator Smith said. It has been so abused by some that it is not exercised by others. Senator Smith wanted a Republican administration, she explained, but to replace President Harry Truman's Democratic administration, for which she had plenty of harsh words, with a Republican regime that lacks political integrity or intellectual honesty would prove equally disastrous to this nation. I do not want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the 4 horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. I doubt if the Republican Party could do so, she added, simply because I do not believe the American people will uphold any political party that puts political exploitation above national interest. Surely we Republicans are not that desperate for victory. I do not want to see the Republican Party win that way, she said. While it might be a fleeting victory for the Republican Party, it would be a more lasting defeat for the American people. Surely it would ultimately be suicide for the Republican Party and the 2-party system that has protected our American liberties from the dictatorship of a 1-party system. As an American, I condemn a Republican fascist just as much as I condemn a Democrat communist, she said. They are equally dangerous to you and me and to our country. As an American, I want to see our nation recapture the strength and unity it once had when we fought the enemy instead of ourselves. Smith presented a declaration of conscience, listing 5 principles she hoped her party would adopt. It ended with a warning. It is high time that we all stopped being tools and victims of totalitarian techniques. Techniques that, if continued here unchecked, will surely end what we have come to cherish as the American way of life. In 1950, 6 other Republican senators signed on to Senator Smith's declaration, leading McCarthy to sneer at Snow White and the 6 Dwarves. Other Republicans quietly applauded Smith's courage, but refused to show similar courage themselves with public support. In a statement in honor of the 75th anniversary of Smith's Declaration of Conscience, Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat of Maryland, noted that our time resembles hers and decried the character assassination, bald-faced lies, petty insults, and round-the-clock disinformation of MAGA Republicans. The hollowing out of American political language tracks the corruption of American government and the disappearance of serious policy debate, he wrote. These movements of thought are not just part of one politician's campaign for power, They are in service of a ruling public philosophy which treats the government as an instrument for class plunder and private self-enrichment, a get-even-filthier-rich quick scheme for the president and his family and friends. But for those who believe that the government should be an instrument for the common good of all and the defense of our freedoms and civil rights, the state of politics in the country is a serious threat to the survival of democratic institutions and the possibility of democratic progress. The essential work of democracy is being trashed by the rule or ruin politics of the MAGA party, Raskin wrote. This is not a partisan exercise we are engaged in today to save and strengthen democracy in America. MAGA and the Department of Government Efficiency are engaged in a hostile takeover of all the political institutions and programmatic achievements of American democracy. Here in America, we have a supreme constitution, not a supreme leader, Raskin wrote. Democracy is not just a static collection of rules and practices. It is an unfinished project in motion, a constant work in progress, and we must never forget that democracy is the political system in service of human freedom. A month ago, another Maine senator, Independent Angus King, recalled Smith's declaration of conscience in a speech to his colleagues in the Senate. "I fear that we are at a similar moment in history," he said, "and today's serious national condition involves the President of the United States." Echoing Senator Smith, today's crisis should not be seen as a partisan issue. This is not about Democrats or Republicans, or immigration or tax policy, or even the next set of elections. Today's crisis threatens the idea of America and the system of government that has sustained us for more than 2 centuries. What's at stake, he said, is the driving force behind the basic design of our Constitution. The grave danger to any society is the concentration of power in one set of hands. King quoted framer of the Constitution, James Madison, who warned, "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." And yet, King said, this accumulation of all powers is exactly what is happening today before our very eyes. Although many in this body unfortunately seem determined to ignore it, deliberately ignore it, the evidence is everywhere. From the elimination of congressionally established agencies, to the withholding of appropriated funds, to issuing executive orders purporting to be law in place of legislation, to sidestepping, if not ignoring, court orders. This president is engaged in the most direct assault on the Constitution in our history. And we in this body, at least thus far, are inert and therefore complicit. This president is attempting to govern as a monarch, unbound by law or constitutional restraint, not as a president subject to the constraints of the Constitution and the rule of law. King implored his colleagues to reclaim our power, do our job. He reminded them, each of us swore, mind you, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that we would bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution. Clearly, he said, the framers knew there might someday be domestic enemies of the Constitution and made it our sacred obligation to defend the Constitution from them. And he called for his colleagues to stand alongside him to do so. Last night, Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat of New Jersey, told host Jimmy Kimmel that Republican senators are indeed unnerved by Trump's behavior and the actions of the administration. The problem, Booker said, is what Thomas Jefferson said. When the public fears their government, there is tyranny. When the government fears its people, there is liberty. Republicans in office are so afraid of Donald Trump that they are letting things go, Booker said. We, the people, have to make our politicians fear the consequences of doing wrong more than they fear that Donald Trump will run a primary against them, or put $100 million, or troll them on the internet. This is one of those moments when we are not going to see change in Washington unless more of us have said enough. Recalling the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., Booker said that the problem today we have to repent for is not just the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but also the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. This is the time Americans have to step up and let their voices be heard. 75 years ago, Senator Smith's voice was largely ignored in the public arena, but she was right. 4 years later, the Senate condemned McCarthy, and after his death in 1957, Wisconsin voters elected Democrat William Proxmire, who held the seat for the next 32 years. And while Senator Smith was later awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, McCarthy has gone down in history as a disgrace to his state and to the United States of America.
Letters from an American was written and read by Heather Cox Richardson. It was produced at Soundscape Productions, Dedham, Massachusetts. Recorded with music composed by Michael Moss.